Hear the word of the Lord from Luke chapter 15. All the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus to listen to him. The Pharisees and the legal experts were grumbling, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Jesus told them this parable. Suppose someone among you had 100 sheep and lost one of them. Wouldn't he leave the other 99 in the pasture and search for the lost one until he finds it? And when he finds it, he is thrilled and places it on his shoulders. When he arrives home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Celebrate with me because I found my lost sheep." In the same way, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who changes both heart and life than over 99 righteous persons who have no need to change their heart and lives. Or what woman, if she owns 10 silver coins and loses one of them, won't light a lamp and sweep the house and search her home carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls together her friends and her neighbors, saying, "Celebrate with me because I found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, joy breaks out in the presence of God's angels over one sinner who changes both heart and life. And Jesus said, "A certain man had 2 sons. The younger son said to the father, 'Father, give me my share of the inheritance.' Then the father divided his estate between them. Soon afterwards, the younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. There he wasted his wealth through extravagant living. When he had used up his resources, a severe food shortage arose in that country, and he began to be in need. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food? But I'm starving to death. I will get up and I will go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me as one of your hired hands.' So he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him, hugging him and kissing him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fatted calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting, because the son of mine that was dead has come back to life. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older brother was in the field. Coming in from the field, he approached the house and heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what was going on. The servant replied, 'Your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fatted calf because he recovered his son back safe and sound.' Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in. But his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, 'Look, I've served you all these years, and I've never disobeyed your instructions. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But this son of yours returns after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes. You slaughter the fatted calf for him.' Then his father said, 'Son, you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found.'" This is the word of God for the people of God. Our thanks be to God. These stories are quite interesting. They're all familiar. We've all heard them a number of times. But we don't always understand what's going on around us. I'm going to give you a little background just to show some disorientation we can have at times. My formative years were spent up in the greater Chattanooga area in northwest Georgia. In that, I spent a lot of my time with my grandmother and grandfather. And one Sunday, when I was about 6 or 7, we went to the National Cemetery in Chattanooga, and they were going to look at a grave of a dead relative there. And I went out playing as a 6 or 7-year-old will, running through the cemetery, and I ran across one freshly dug grave that I didn't realize had just recently been filled, and my feet sank in above my ankles, and I came flying out, terrified. Thought I was going to be gobbled up by that grave, and came down and was leery of cemeteries for years after that. It was so traumatic. But it was just a grave that had been filled. There was nothing evil there pulling me down, but it certainly felt that way in my 6 or 7-year-old perspective. In my life there were a lot of battles fought during the Civil War right there in the Chattanooga area, a pivotal point. And there are all these monuments everywhere, and I grew up with these monuments, and I thought everybody had monuments around, and cannons were there as monuments, and if you didn't have some in your backyard, you were deprived. But I found that wasn't the case. And I got deep into studying the history, found out actually my great-great-grandfather, who had been too old to fight, but had been conscripted to come in and remove the dead men and mules and horses from the Battle of Chickamauga and help in the burial of those. The soldiers were buried in mass graves. And I found out that those monuments were headstones to those fallen soldiers because their families knew not where their bodies lay. I had that information, and then, in the last few years, it's become the thing now to start tearing down all the monuments. They're interpreted in a whole different way, not as they were meant intentionally, but in that way. And things are just that way. Things aren't always as they present themselves. You have to look to the deeper story and understand what's the history behind the things and how it comes up. These stories that I just read, Jesus presented for one reason. Now, I'm going to deconstruct the stories to reconstruct them so you can understand. You see, at that time in Israel, the whole worship service of God had been corrupted. The deals had been made with the Roman emperor, and now religious authority was all about money. Herod the Great had expanded the temple, and it was the third greatest temple in the empire, and they had a thriving business on tourism 3 times a year for the major festivals. It spread to the local people. There were a lot of cottage industries going on in which there were cisterns that had been provided that they could do the ritualistic baths before you went to a holy service. All the things were going on. A lot of money was coming to those in power within the synagogues and especially the temples. And so Jesus was speaking to that group because they had lost sight of who they were and what they should be. He tells the story of what we call the Good Shepherd. But he tells the story because those present don't even understand what a shepherd is. They idolize David as the shepherd king, but they don't idolize shepherds. They realize that their founder was a wandering Armenian shepherd called Abram, and later Abraham. but they lost their heritage. They lost their history, and it's sold out for money. And so Jesus tells them this story, and it's really couldn't happen because sheep are the most domesticated animals we have. They cannot survive without a shepherd. And one person cannot care for 100 sheep without losing some. But he told the story because some of those in authority owned sheep, but they had hired shepherds to care for them, and they knew nothing about how the shepherds cared for them and what was going on. But they were making money from it. And they knew the one thing, that a shepherd was responsible for every sheep in his care, and if he lost one, it was deducted from his wages, and they lost nothing. So Jesus takes that information and builds a story. And they don't get it. That there'll be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who accepts God than over 99 righteous. And they didn't get it. They knew they had to be righteous, and it couldn't be talking about them, and it couldn't be about the sinners that are around here, because sinners can't come to worship. Now, I asked you a question right there. If it was a requirement to get in this morning that you be sin-free, who among us would be here? Nobody. Nobody. I mean, I had to commute from Cartersville this morning. I had to deal with a little traffic. Not too bad, though. But nobody. The church is a hospital for sick souls. And everyone is welcomed. You don't have to have a membership card to get in. But you often need to be invited. So Jesus went forward with the other story. A woman who had 10 silver coins, and silver coins are of value, and she loses one, and that's a value that is lost. But there's more to that story than is understood. Those 10 coins were part of her marriage dowry. And normally that was wore around the headband. You may have seen some pictures of Middle Eastern women to this day that do that. And if one was lost, it symbolized you did not care for your marriage and you were unfaithful. And of course, she's going to diligently look for that because that wasn't the case. And she finds it and she calls her friends for rejoicing. But we'll come to that later. And then the story of a father and 2 sons. Now, we've got to understand these sons and why things happened as they seem to have happened. I can only perceive that the older brother was a goody two-shoes. And anything his father said do, he was jumping and asking how high he needed to jump to do it. And everything he did was always right. And his little brother could never get credit for doing anything right. He finally gets old enough and says, I've had enough of this. I just don't like being around him anymore. So he asks for his share of the inheritance. As a younger brother, that's 1/3. So 2/3 is left behind. And any that is made after that, and multiplying that 2/3, has been left behind. But he takes it, and he says, I know I can do better than this. And he does for a while, a short while. You know, we seem to never have enough money to last if we want to spend it every time we turn around. And so he ends up feeding pigs, which are unclean animals to Jewish people, particularly a good Jewish boy, and he craves what the pigs would have. And so he comes back to his father, and his father welcomes him back because his father says those words, he was lost, he was dead, and now he's alive and he's back. And we must celebrate. But his brother couldn't do it. His brother had to embellish what was in the text about how his younger brother had spent the money on prostitutes, which must have said something about where his mind was, or he wouldn't have even thought that. But there it ends. He's outside refusing to come in, and the younger brother is inside. So now how do we appropriate all of this? Well, today, it tells us, just like the first century was, how people are lost. People are lost sometimes just like sheep. Even though there's plenty of pasture to eat right where they're at, they're going to follow a little trail and soon be out on their own and in all types of danger they didn't ever imagine could be there. That's the way a lot of people are, slowly wandering away. Or some are accused of things that are not true. Mean, hateful things. And it drives them away from God and the church because church people have said that to them. Or some are so full of themselves with pride that they think they can never do anything wrong and they've got everything right. And if you just need to know an answer, ask them. That's the older brother. And then there's the younger brother, and it could be a sister or what, that could never do anything right. And so they're driven out because they can't do anything right. So that's why those stories are there. They're a story reaching out across time saying, when you think you've got it all, you haven't. If you're not sharing Jesus, you haven't got it all. If you're not loving the unlovable, you don't have it all. It's not easy to do. Jesus said we need to take up our cross and follow him. And that's what we need to do. It's not easy. The cross is a sign of execution, but we need to execute all of the sins in our lives by the grace of God and accept his forgiveness and move to grow to be the Christians God has called us to be. Not getting on anybody's case unnecessarily, calling the truth, but loving people in doing it, inviting people in, caring for people, nurturing people, loving people. And why would we do that? Because God came to be one with us, that we might be one with him. Jesus was fully God and fully human, and yet he was without sin. And yet he took the sin of the whole world, all that had ever been, that was, and would ever be, and nailed it on the cross in the shedding of his blood and said, it is forgiven. The perfect sacrifice has been made. No future sacrifices are needed. Jesus isn't sacrificed every day in heaven. That's over. He rose from the dead. He conquered death. And that's the gift we all have. So now it's the faith that we accept that grace and that we move forward in our lives. Not saying how great I am, but how great the God is that loves me and loves you and you and you and you and you and you. That's why those stories are there. That we might use them as illustrations and we might pull from our own lives and say, God has forgiven this. I understand. I don't know a family that doesn't have brokenness in it. Some won't admit it, but I don't know of any if you search. I don't know of any place that doesn't have brokenness in it. And so our mission field is apparent. If we know the good news, if we've got the love of Jesus in our hearts, we've accepted him as our Savior, are we living as imitators of Jesus? That's what we're called to be. So that's where the question stands today. Where are you or were you in these stories? And how can you reach out beyond these stories to those who do not know the Lord? As we stand and sing our last hymn, I want us to break. And after we sing, we're going to sing it just a little bit longer than it is, just a little bit, chorus-wise. I want us to stand and break afterwards, and I want